Hello, welcome back to Soul Sessions with Creative Mind, and we are ending our series on trauma and PTSD and resilience with something we're all talking about, which is COVID and how it affects us collectively. And so we're going to talk today about collective trauma and collective resilience.
Yeah, there was a couple of questions on in the group on the Facebook regarding the collective impact of COVID, and also the impact it has on first responders and medical teams. So, yeah, hopefully we'll answer some of that throughout the talk.
Well, we hear about collective trauma in our past history. Like we've had people, our grandparents have been through wars, depression, different, depending on what country you're from, there could have been an upheaval, a revolution, transfer of power, sicknesses. And so we all globally have experienced a pandemic, most of us for the first time in our whole lives. And it's a once every 100-year event that can happen. And I think when I first started, it was just a weird feeling. You watch all those sci-fi movies of like this plague coming out and zombies and, just a lot of end of the world, Armageddon type of movies. And I remember watching the news thinking, this is not real. We're watching Paris being empty, Times Square, no one on the streets. And it just had that like eerie feeling. So I think we were all impacted, not only from just this thing that we had to experience together, but just how everyone coped with it differently.
Yeah, there's certainly been a lot of suffering to go around out there. Just people experiencing a lot of disruption. So the educational system was disrupted. Kids couldn't go to school and had to learn in a different way. Teachers had to find a way to teach kids in a new way. Certainly the hospitals, the medical system was disrupted by...
And still is. I mean, a lot of the medical health workers have fatigue and anxiety, and they're, kind of exhausted from this whole thing, traumatized themselves from just witnessing so much death. And
I used to work in a hospital, so I can imagine just regular work in a hospital is... can be traumatizing.
Yeah, and then you're in ICU and all those life and death situations, but to see it repeated at such a high rate.
And then a couple more. We know restaurants and the service industries were severely impacted. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of businesses went under. And then, of course, transportation, hospitality, hotels, airlines, cruise ships, all that. I mean, just millions and billions of people impacted very directly by a little tiny bug.
And even therapists we have friends that are therapists and clients that have been therapists, and you're kind of transitioning out of therapy, and they're so overwhelmed with patients, and if they're working as a therapist in the medical model where you're taking insurance and they just pack you in, and a lot of them feel, they were disrupted. Now they had to do teletherapy and learning Zoom and then not having that same kind of connection and learning how to bond with a client over a video screen. And so a lot of disruption. And I can imagine the children, how they feel not being able to be social. For my mom, too, she was older, not being able to be around people. I mean, when you're older and you're alone, you rely on those like activities as a senior to feel connected to a community and just to be alone and not be touched. And even some of my clients that are single, thinking, I just been alone for months, not having another human contact. So a lot of disruption and upheaval. And, for me, I think it really made me realize how fragile we are in the world. We're such, we think we're so advanced with technology and all our modern conveniences, and this little tiny bug that we can't even see with the naked eye, like basis brought us humanity to its knees, basically, to disrupt so much.
Yeah, and certainly
it's humbling in a way, right?
Yeah, and then the loss of life, of course. We know almost everyone knows at least somebody or personally lost loved ones in the pandemic. That in itself, that kind of helplessness in the face of suffering and loss and death is itself kind of a trauma.
And I think we want to get, now it seems like cases are dropping, things are opening up again. People are having COVID fatigue, they say, and we want to move on with our life, but we have to also not forget what we lost, and the people we lost, and not and understand that maybe you didn't lose anyone, but someone that has lost a parent or a grandparent or child, and so it was really a sad 2 years, but with every tragedy, there's always an opportunity. So we don't want to be all doom and gloom, but we do want to address the impact. And you have some stats of what's the impact on mental health, mental health?
Yeah, and this is just kind of as an example of some of the challenges that people have been facing recently. So we know that there was already really high levels of depression and anxiety in the country and in the world. But here's some of the stats. The depressive disorders went up about 27% after the virus kicked in, right after the COVID.
27%.
27%, but that translates into 53 million additional cases.
In the U.S.?
In the U.S. So that is incredibly high, 53 million.
And you had said that it's especially prevalent in young women, 20 to 45.
Yes, they were hit the hardest.
Wow.
The young in general and women in general were hit harder than the general
I can imagine
population.
just getting out of college and having to, you're, just starting out, you might be one of the people they let go because you were like the lowest woman on the totem pole, and in the corporations, when they had to cut back, and so kind of where you go, and like your 20s is supposed to be this exciting social life, and I can imagine how that would impact the women.
Then anxiety disorders went up about 25%, which translates into 76 million additional cases.
Wow.
So a system that was already kind of overwhelmed, then on top of that, these new additional cases kind of brought on a bigger challenge. And then, of course, there was disruption to mental health services as well.
So there were an ability to get enough mental health?
Yeah, because typically people would go to a clinic or a hospital or some kind of center to get the therapy. But of course that wasn't possible during the lockdowns and all that stuff.
And then maybe they hesitated to reach out because they didn't know if they can go anywhere, or they didn't know about telehealth. So yeah, it's been really disruptive. But I also think that when we talk about opportunities, that every time there's a tragedy, every time there's something that challenges us in our life, whether it's a small little setback, like losing a job, or even facing an illness, that could be a doorway to something different in our life. And I know we know from what they're talking about in the job market is that people are rethinking, what do I want to do with my life? Do I want to work 60 hours a week in the corporate jungle, having to drive away from my family, commuting 2 hours a day, and to have this terrible boss that just is on me, and I'm working to death and I don't even enjoy life. And then they got a chance to work from home, and it's, I can be with my kids and I could spend more time. Some people weren't appreciative of spending more time with their kids as much as others, but yeah, it just kind of turned around our life a little bit. So we started to examine, do we want to go back to how it was? And how was I so blind to see how disruptive this or limiting this was? So that's a great opportunity. When we think about this for the last 2 years, what opportunities opened up for you because of this? We don't want to discard the tragedies, but we also want to see, well, how can we be resilient?
Yeah, so let's shift gears into the resilient model, because that's really what we want to focus on, especially as coaches. We just wanted to acknowledge that we know the challenges and the loss that people have experienced, and that it's definitely something to consider and to kind of wake us up to what is the reality of what's been happening around the world, really. So there's a quote by Rumi that I really love, and it says, grief can be the garden of compassion. If you keep your heart open through everything, your pain can become your greatest ally in your life's search for love and wisdom.
Wow.
And just like in our individual lives, like you say, when something challenges us or stops us in our tracks, and we're forced to look inward and ask those big questions of, what am I doing? What is the meaning of my life?
Who am I?
Who am I? What why do these things happen? It gives us pause, and it gives us also an opportunity to recreate ourselves, to reinvent ourselves, to really make the big changes that we need to make. So just like at the individual level, that's true, it is also true at the collective level. Right? We've experienced this and are experiencing this collectively. So the same principle applies at the collective level. It's giving us an opportunity to reimagine education, to rethink the medical system, to
rethink business, how we want to operate, and even what we want to do for money. How do we want to make money in our life? Do we want to be chasing that corner office constantly? What I've been reading is the research is showing that people were, they're kind of, you're in that bubble in the corporate world, and you're like, I got to go. You're on that treadmill with everyone else, and it's all about competition and who's going to get the next promotion and how much money can I make, and if I go to this level, I get this, kind of vacation and bonuses, and you just kind of like are chasing this thing. Then a lot of people are saying, wow, you know what? I think I'm going to stay in my lower position, not make as much money, and have more time for myself versus keep chasing, like keep going and going and going. And so that's interesting how people were less materialistic in this stage. I think that which is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be successful and wealthy, but if you're doing it just to be successful and wealthy, and if you're building your own persona on that, then when that gets taken away, you're just Joe Smith and at home. You're not like the big executive anymore. And a lot of people have said that they had to really discover who they were outside of their position and their title in their job. When they got laid off, it's like, who am I? And so I think it is a great opportunity.
Yeah. You know what I noticed is when the whole world shut down for those couple of months, well, the news was that pollution went dramatically down, right? That indicated that, we could literally change the course of what we're doing to the planet and how we're relating to the planet. So
quickly.
Very quickly. And we saw that wildlife started to come back, and there was fresh air and all these incredible changes just from our human change.
Yeah, I think in LA they said the smog just went away, and it was the days, the sky was so clear, the clearest it's ever been. Of course, that's not happening anymore, but it's it's amazing. There's so many benefits to. Yeah. Almost like we had to be forced to shut down. And I think for me, when I was in the corporate world, it was 20 years ago almost that I was laid off, and 19 years ago this May. And I remember it was so hard for me to leave and pursue something I loved. And I had to have that disruption. I had to get laid off to say, wait a minute, okay, I wake myself up from this hypnotism that I was in, like hypnotized by that corporate. You get in that group of people and you think like everyone else, that group think, and you just kind of go with the flow. So this was a time to really go back and be home with yourself, be alone with yourself. Maybe you did the Netflix binge for a while, but then after that, you're just like, you know what? I can't just binge Netflix all day. I need to do something with my life. Maybe you picked up your first personal development book, or maybe you started listening to something different on YouTube. Yeah. And I know a lot of people decided, I want to work for myself. I want to start a career from home. And so a lot of newness came out of this as well.
Yeah, I know for you, it was very personal as well, kind of thinking about family and being close to family.
Yeah, we were in LA for 8 years because I hate the winter, and we just love the ocean, and it was just beautiful living there. But then when COVID happened, I was so far from my mom. She's just turned 80. She was on the East Coast. And when we finally got all our vaccinations came in, I was like, oh, I can finally see her. It had been a year since I've seen her. And I said, I don't want to have to be so far away. So we moved back to the East Coast this summer to be close. And my sisters are on the East Coast, my brother. And so we're all within driving distance of each other now versus having to take a 6-hour, 5.5-hour plane ride. And it just made me feel like, well, what am I doing? Like, my mom's here. We should be able to go visit her. And so we've seen her twice already. And now that it's opening up again, we'll go visit. And it's just nice to just get in the car and drive and be with her the same day in a couple hours. And it just really made me value family. Your family's here too, so you have family.
Yeah, we got family in the East Coast as well. So it's like it gave everyone a chance to reevaluate their lifestyle and make those changes, like we were saying. And that's what it's about, right? Because just like at the individual level, these opportunities and challenges kind of prompt us to rethink everything, to really ask the deeper questions. But then we have to follow through. We have to make the changes. We actually have to really start thinking, what are the actual changes that I need to make?
A lot of people made changes about their health too, because people that were really suffering from COVID were people that had diabetes, overweight, high blood pressure. And so you think, well, that's not going to affect me. I have a little diabetes, or I can manage it, but then it could be life-threatening if you get something like this, or the flu even. And so I think people started also wanting to be healthier, wanting to do yoga, wanting to seek higher knowledge. And that can't be a bad thing. I also think, I wish, one of the greatest parts, I think, in the beginning, and I remember the moment where they were showing on the news all the empty streets, but then especially in Italy, like I'm getting goosebumps for this, where they would hit their pots and pans or shake for the healthcare workers every night. And it was just a solidarity that culture had of, we're all here together, and guys were singing from the balconies, and it was just, I don't know, I just feel like we all stopped and appreciated each other. And even here when they would do that in New York too, when New York got hit really bad initially, and people were like yelling out their windows, and it was just so, I don't know, I just felt this sense of collective hope and collective compassion. And this is what's going to make our world different. I mean, if we talk about collective trauma, let's talk about collective compassion. And how do we love each other more? I mean, this has also caused a lot of division in a lot of families and, friendships, and because of what everyone believes about what this is. And I think that we just need to remember that time of wholeness that we have. And that is such a beautiful gift as humans, that we can bring to the world.
Yes. So I have another quote.
So why do we need a tragedy like this for us to remember that we're all human and we're all the same and we're all, need each other?
So we go from Rumi to Einstein.
Ooh.
And he says, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them.
Mm-hmm.
So here's where we need a paradigm shift. In other words, we're not going to solve and face these new challenges, the climate, the social isolation, the lack of services, or the increase in services that we need to create for supporting our fellow human beings with the same understanding and the same systems that got us into this mess in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So the paradigm shift comes by understanding that we're no longer living in a material universe, meaning the old model of everything is based on economics, on material goods, on
consumerism.
Consumerism, absolutely. Now we have to shift it.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have to access what we know from Eastern philosophy, what we know from psychology, what we know from Western philosophy, and just from our own kind of wisdom as human beings, tap into those deeper resources and find new ways of relating to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the big challenge. But again, it's an opportunity because people are kind of in this questioning phase. And if we simply go back to business as usual.
Like return to normal. That's what everyone's like,
Yes.
We're going to return to normal. I was like, I don't want to return to normal. Normal wasn't good.
Yes.
Normal got us here.
Then we'll miss that opportunity.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of a window that opens, and right now, I'd say in the next 2 or 3 years, that window is open because people will still be kind of finding their footing and getting back into kind of work and school and family and all this stuff.
And we're going to have to reintegrate into being social again. I mean, seeing ourselves without masks again and feeling okay to touch each other again. I just wonder how people are going to be, if they're going to be a little, keep 6 feet away for a while, or if they're going to just go back and as if nothing ever happened. I don't know. But I think the main thing is the inner world. Like, how do we look at the world less of a separate people are separate from us, matter is separate from us, that external world is separate. How do we live as if as conscious beings, as we're connected to everything? So instead of getting in a fight with someone over politics or what you believe about vaccines, you say, what do we have in common? What's our humanity? What's our soul? Doesn't have any disagreement. Our soul is pure and love and compassion. So our egos are all just getting in the way of us connecting on that deeper level. And do we want to keep perpetuating division and destruction of our environment? And it's like that ego. The ego world is taking over with fear. And how do we bring more love and compassion to our neighbors and let go of our anger and deal with it? Deal with our own conflicts within ourselves, so we can see less conflict in the world.
Yes, you hit the
nail on the head.
The nail on the head with the ego, right?
Yeah.
Because at the individual level, it's the ego that creates that kind of limitation in our mind. That it's all about us, and we're out for ourselves, and every action is directed towards self-improvement, self-development, survival, but it's all about the self, right? The Dalai Lama said something like this. He says, too much self-centered attitude results in isolation, loneliness, anger. The extreme self-centered attitude is the source of suffering. This is well known. I mean, this is ancient tradition. The Buddhist tradition goes back millennium, and it's the wisdom that we need to tap into now. That this ego is what creates the situations that we face in the world. At the individual level, you can think of society as a collection of individuals. Right? So think of individuals that are ego-centered. That is, that they are out for themselves, and they're thinking at that limited perspective of the ego.
Unindividuated people. They're kind of living out, and it's not they don't do it on purpose, but that's kind of how we're conditioned to be, is ego-centered at the beginning part of life.
That's right. It's our human condition, absolutely. Yes. It helps us survive. And there's really nothing wrong with it, except that when we over-identify as persona ego, we remain in that limitation. And we can only act then in that limited sphere of understanding. So higher knowledge, which comes from the Upanishads, the Dhammapada, which is the Buddhist text, the Bhagavad Gita, these ancient wisdom traditions, they teach us how to transcend the ego. So as now at the collective level, like we're saying.
But we have to do it individually. You can't get everyone out of ego collectively at once. It has to happen one person at a time, right? Each person has to take responsibility.
Well, yes, let's say the change has to hit the individual at the individual level, right? They have to absorb it and enact it. But we can certainly think in terms of educating children very early on what is this Eastern wisdom tradition about? What is it talking about?
Teaching children about projection and that what they see in another is a reflection of them, and that non-dual way of being, and that their persona isn't, the be all end all. That they who they are is they have that perfection within them.
That's right.
That soulful, who they really are, and remembering that. So they're not out trying to compete and becoming the bully or needing to be the cheerleader to feel important. Or
yes, and it goes back to this idea again that the scientific materialistic perspective, although we love science and we respect it, and we know it's simply a tool, it was never meant to supplant the whole idea of a living universe, of a conscious living universe, because the materialistic perspective simply says, well, material is dead and only human beings have this awareness, this consciousness that makes us special. That's a very limiting perspective, and it's outdated essentially. And even now, current neuroscience and even physics is acknowledging that. They're talking about moving into a post-materialistic universe, meaning we can no longer sustain that idea that it's a materialistic universe or a material universe, because there is no evidence for that.
So could you explain that for people that don't understand? So basically it's, or haven't heard this before, it took me a while to get, is that the science has discovered that they can't really find matter.
Exactly.
There's no solid matter under a microscope. It's energy. It's not anything solid, but it appears solid because we're seeing it through our senses. It's vibrating at a fast speed, but it looks still to us. But it's actually, everything's moving in flux, and they're realizing the observer has an impact on what the object becomes. So there's this, nothing is set, that you are a participant in your own reality.
Absolutely.
Creating your own reality.
Absolutely.
And so if we're collectively doing that, we can collectively shift this world. Even though it's illusory, it's still all we have to dance in and play in. We can actually be a participant in a new destiny for humanity.
Yeah, the wisdom traditions do not say that, oh, this is just an illusion, so don't worry about it.
Yeah.
That's a misunderstanding. What they say is that you have to understand the nature of what you're experiencing in the world. The way it appears to you is not the way it really exists. That the appearance to you as an individual is essentially a very subjective interpretation that you're making about the world. And if you base your life and your actions on that interpretation, you're missing the whole point. You're missing the mark of what is this experience of being in the world. So they're simply saying, try to understand the true nature of experience so that you can then make the right choices in your actions and the way you respond to the world.
And respond to others.
And
be kinder to people and kinder to yourself. And
Yes.
understand why people can project onto you, where they're coming from, and then what pulls from you, and that all the shadow work that we teach in Jungian coaching is very valuable for you to reclaim that. I think it's for me, it was always the first step, and for our clients, it's that first step to awakening it kind of shakes up what you think is reality, because you can hear these things like, oh, everything's consciousness and all that, and you're one with everything. But when you do shadow work, you actually get a direct experience of the false reality that you've been buying into, and how your mind is creating these stories and these realities that aren't even real, like in our mind, or these circumstances in our life that we think are so real and solid, and it makes us question everything. Just like when we went through the past 2 years, it's starting to make us question things, and that's the opportunities. Whenever we stop assuming that things are the way they are, one way, and we're absolutely sure, it's better to be a little uncertain and start questioning and being curious about it.
Yeah, and at the heart of it is that oneness, meaning that what we are experiencing in this in this world, in this life, in this universe, is essentially a consciousness experience. Everything we are perceiving is existing and arising within a one consciousness, and this one consciousness, we all share it. It's simply when we fall into the sleep, the delusion of individuality, that we're separate from things, that we're kind of locked into our individual body, and that's how we exist. That's a misperception. And this is verified even by current neuroscience. This is not mysticism. And so that's why we need to move past that kind of false idea that we are in a material universe and consuming these natural resources for our economies and our benefit.
It's this based on this that there's a fixed level of assets, and that we have to rob from each other or cheat and steal to get these things. And
yes, because the assumption, let's say
there's not enough for everyone. Right?
Yes, exactly. And the implications of a consciousness universe are very different than when we approach it from a materialistic perspective. It is that we decide what reality is going to be, right? And so if we never question it, if we never really do that self-inquiry as to what is the meaning of my experience in life, then we just go to default mode, which is what our senses tell us. And our senses only tell us the subjective experience. What is good for me? What do I do about myself? Which is, again, that ego perspective, that limited perspective. But if we do self-inquiry and we ask the question, is this really true? Are my senses really telling me what's real and what's out there in the universe? Then we find that they're not. Our senses are very limited. They're only giving us a
very small little piece of
a fraction of what's really there. And then we start to experience or have a direct experience of reality.
It's what just comes to mind is that movie The Room. Do you remember that movie? The woman was basically, it was not a pleasant movie. She was kidnapped and with the little boy.
Oh, right.
And the little boy only grew up in that room, so he thought that was the world. And he didn't know that there was another world out there. And so it was like a culture shock to him, like, but this is, our world. And it's kind of like that idea. We live in this tiny little room and we think, okay, we've learned how to work around it, rearrange the furniture, my favorite quote. And, but then there's this, you open the door and there's this whole other world and other expansive way of being that we just, our senses just won't let us see. But if we start questioning it, that's when we start to see the other world. And I think our dream life, like participating fully in your dreams, imagination, looking out for synchronicities and these little internal, external kind of matching up, and that mystery of life. It's like, okay, you're kind of piercing the veil of the illusion of separateness, and you start to really see the magic that you are, and what you're a part of is everything. That you're connected to everything. And so if you're connected to everything and everyone, why would you just take pieces for yourself? You would share because it's you're sharing with, and if you love someone else, that's you're loving. If you hate someone else, that's you're hating. You start to see that, oh, okay, I'm connected to it all, so I could have more love and more expansiveness and more control over our lives. And it's so much to it.
And so that's the challenge. So let's talk about a practical approach, right? Just like in individual transformation, we know that, okay, just because an individual hears this, it doesn't transform their lives. They have to find a practical way of implementing it. So for the individual, the practical way comes from understanding that my actions are essentially conditioned. In other words, I'm acting out of past conditioning, not out of free will. So society, we can say, is also acting out of past conditioning, right? You see it in traditions, you see it in institutions, that people carry on in a certain way, and they never question. They just assume, well, that's the way it's always been done. The church, the schools. This
is how I communicate. If I want something, I have to get angry, fight for it. If I don't be too nice because people take advantage of you, and you just learn this kind of guarded way of being.
Yes.
Or hiding and not standing up for yourself because you don't want people to get angry, and you just get into these patterns, and everyone's kind of dancing on eggshells around each other, and no one's really talking to each other.
That's right. But then something painful happens, and the individual then is forced to question that model. So here is kind of where a lot of people then take that opportunity, right? If they use it as an opportunity to change, then the change begins, the transformation begins. So the first step is intention. So as a society, as a group, we have to intend now to change the world.
So many people forget that. Like I sometimes forget, what do I want to intend in this situation? Instead of reacting all the time to what's happening. You can set an intention and start moving toward what you want to create.
So the collective intention now is to improve society, to improve business, like you were saying, to create businesses that help the planet instead of destroy it.
And are abundant. People don't feel lack. People can use their resource, have more resources to learn and grow and not work so hard, pounding the pavement, to have flow happen in their life.
Exactly, because if you think about what technology has done, now technology is neutral. It's neither good nor bad. It simply amplifies our mind. So as we intend in a conscious way, we should intend that technology serves a higher purpose, that it communicates connectedness, higher knowledge to people instead of division and frustration or isolation, that the technology amplifies our willingness to learn, to teach each other, to connect with other people from across the world, which we can literally do now.
I know, it's great. We reach people all over the world, the podcasts and our work, because of wonderful technology. But what's the intention? Is the intention to spread hate, division, or is the intention to lift humanity up and be a participant in that? And I think for every one negative, message that goes out there, every 100, one positive or one uplifting message counteracts that. I think it's such a powerful force of compassion and love and sharing.
Yes.
That we can do. All of us contribute. So are you posting something on your social media that's complaining and attacking someone? Or are you posting something that's going to help everyone who reads it feel better? Like, what can you contribute to society, even in a small way? Even if it's like 10 people are following you and you have a small circle of friends, how can you intend to create the world a better place?
That's right. And it starts with the individual. But again, we have to start thinking now in larger scales because the challenges are upon us.
We need to
we
get
can no longer
a herd of people to shift. Yes.
Well, again, we're going to use the technologies because these technologies that amplify our minds are very useful to us.
Which is like what we love about training our coaches, because they're going out there creating their businesses and they're spreading this higher knowledge to all new people that have not heard it before and creating this ripple effect, which is so rewarding for us to be a part of that, to be a catalyst for that, and then them being a catalyst for others. And it just keeps happening. You keep uplifting others and then they uplift others, and that kind of...
Yeah, so it doesn't stop at intention, of course. The intention is the first step, and this is just an example, but then comes this self-inquiry. Just like we were saying, it's an opportunity to ask, why are we doing things this way, and what is the meaning of these things? That self-inquiry, if we do it collectively as groups, will lead us then to making the right changes, the right choices.
Asking why are we doing this, whether it's in your company or whether it's in your community, like questioning, why are we doing it this way? Like, government should be doing this. Why are we doing this way? Why are we school boards? And let's think of, not just assume it's been done that way and we should always do it that way. Let's question it. Is that what you're saying with self-inquiry? Yeah. We're really starting to question. And I think that's what COVID did. A lot of people said, why am I getting in my car and commuting to work every day? You started that self-inquiry.
When I can work at home.
Yeah, it's like, I want to set the intention to work from home. And why would I? So that self-inquiry helps us break us out of that, like a sleepwalking stage where we just assume things are the way they are and we can't change them.
That's right. And it operates at that level because when we question something, it forces the question back to us, like, why am I allowing this, or why am I buying into this? And then it disrupts that pattern of conditioning, that we're not just acting out of our past conditioning, meaning out of, well, everybody's doing it this way, therefore I'm going to do it this way as well. It disrupts that, right? That's where people come up with new ideas. That's why they call it the disruptive economies, right? Or businesses.
Disruptors, yeah.
Yeah, that people come up with these
like
brand new ways.
Uber came out, and now there's Lyft, and there's other car.
Airbnb.
We don't need to stay at a hotel. We can get an Airbnb now. And
yes. And so that kind of thinking is very useful for making big changes.
Innovation.
So you have setting the intention, then self-inquiry. Then that leads to this kind of making the mind subtle, meaning new opportunities can emerge from the deeper wisdom within our minds.
It's like that room you were in, you're opening the door, opening the windows, and it's like new information, new insights, new ideas can come in, a new way of perspective can come in.
That's right. So it's just like Einstein says, you cannot solve the problem by using the same tools that you used to create it. So you have to find new sources of wisdom, of information, of knowledge, and those sources are in the mind. They're not out there, again, because it's a consciousness universe, meaning we're creating it from the inside out, not the other way around.
We're seeing ourselves in many forms and in many faceless forms reflected back to us.
Yes.
And we have to remember that we're seeing ourselves. This isn't maybe not our ego self, but we're seeing an aspect of our deeper self in everything that we touch. And I think the most beautiful thing we can all do is get in nature and appreciate, because it's like the divine mother coming and keeping us safe. It's this beautiful world that we live in, and just it's so full of beauty and love and creativity. And with the work, I know for me, I worked in New York City for 5 years and just commuting, and you didn't see a lot of nature in New Jersey. And I moved out to Colorado, and I was like, wow, I went hiking for the first time. And I just really I'm not a nature girl, outdoorsy kind of girl, but it really made me realize how much we have to appreciate nature, because we can get so locked into our computer screens and our technology, and we need that balance. We need that earthly kind of sense of there's something beautiful about the oneness we can feel when we're connected to nature. We're looking at animals, and if you can't get out there in nature, if you're not near nature, watch some nature on YouTube or watch the Discovery Channel or something to appreciate this beautiful world we live on. And then you'll be invested in wanting to keep it healthy and keep it alive and keep it the way it is, so we don't destroy it, because we only have a planet here to live on, and we have to make sure it's safe.
One last quote from another scientist, Carl Sagan. For small creatures such as we, the vastness is bearable only through love. In other words, we are in this infinite, vast universe. That sense of being isolated, we can't sustain it. We can't thrive and live if we are separate from the world, separate from each other. We have to find that connection through love, right? And real love, not just, let's say, because the commandments tell us or religion tell us, but find it from within, right? That understanding that we are connected to nature, to each other, to the whole universe, and that sense then saves us. That we're no longer the little creatures lost in a vast space. That we belong here. This is our home. This earth, the way we experience it, is our own creation. It's our home. It's our opportunity to exist, and we hope you take this to heart, and simply, if you start to question, just take it as a question. What does this mean? What does this really mean for me? That's the beginning of wisdom right there.
I also think if you can't love someone, you have to ask yourself, what's the conflict within me that's stopping me from offering love? Because it's not what that person is doing, but it's something in you that's not able to love them. And what is that? And that examination will bring you closer to that person than you realize, especially the people that drive you crazy, that trigger you. They will show you love more than any person who's overtly loving to you. It's those people that challenge us that actually help us realize who we are. And so it's a beautiful thing. So what a great conversation today. It was more than I thought it would be, better than I thought it would be. I don't know what I expected, but we always bring the deep stuff. I really love this message of setting an intention as humanity. So I hope you take that to heart, bring it to your communities. What's the intention we want to share? How can we, instead of getting back to normal, how can we get back to maybe a new normal, which is a new, better normal, a new, more loving normal, a new, more, another level of transcendence in our human evolution.
There's definitely an opportunity here.
Yeah. And this is the end of our trauma series. And so we're going to turn it around a little bit and make it a little brighter for the next couple weeks. We are going to be talking about my new book, which is back here, Like a Spark from Fire, just came out this month, available on ebook, audiobook, and paperback on Amazon and other booksellers across Barnes & Noble. We also have this on independent bookstores. It's an indie book. It's all about shadow work, and it's designed for women, but if you're a guy, I'm sure you'll get a lot out of it. And it really talks about this idea that spark within you is who you are. You know, you're connected to the divine, and that nothing you've ever done, nothing in your past could ever take that away, and to remember and reclaim it, and really talk about the ego and the shadow and how do we work with emotions and create something new in our life. So if you haven't checked it out yet, listen to the free preview they give you, and hopefully you'll take advantage. And we're going to introduce some concepts of the book in the next couple of weeks.
Maybe I'll interview you.
Ooh, okay. That sounds fun. Scary, but fun. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next week on Soul Sessions.
Stay well.
Take care.